to do right now. All right, so folks, you guys can all see my screen, I'm assuming. And right now we're looking at Unit 3, which talks about basically introducing you to what CSS is. And I do have the pre-recorded lectures, and some of you were telling me that the audio is not great here, so I did leave this note for myself to record new videos next time around. But I do want to talk about what CSS is, because it's really the second major language that you have to learn inside of web programming. And I always tell people that basically the way that things break down is HTML is responsible for content and structure. So the words on the page that you see, the images that you place on the page typically, and how you're forming it. So if you have a good structure, you can build on top of it with CSS and JavaScript beautifully. But it always starts with good, valid HTML code. So if you ever think that I'm getting a little harsh on having your code be valid, it's only because if it's not and you start to put CSS on it, things start to fall apart. All right, so what does a style sheet actually do? And I always like to give this example here. And I know that any of you that have watched the other lecture videos, you know, I kind of start with this, or sort of start with this on most of them. But the page that we're looking at is a sample site developed a number of years ago, quite a while ago, actually. And you'll notice that the person that put this together gives you all the code. And in fact, they're not hiding any of it because they're really kind of trying to promote the capabilities of CSS. And more particularly, this is actually CSS version 3 that we're looking at, which has been around for quite a while. But there were some significant advances that came with this version of CSS, where CSS kind of went beyond just being a language to style content and also started to venture into the realm of controlling behaviors on the screen as well. So in other words, some of the things that like move around and react to the user are sometimes the result of CSS and not the JavaScript that you might assume. Now, if you take a look at this page, and what you should do is like start by doing a right-click view source. And you notice whenever I do that, I don't do that on top of one of the words or an image. I try to find a blank spot on the page and then do view page source. Because if you don't, sometimes you will end up grabbing code for other things. All right, so let's take a look at this document. You're going to see that it's a basic HTML document. Yes, it does have some stuff in it a little beyond what we've learned yet. But the basic crux of it is it's an HTML5 document. You see the doc type up here, you see the head, some pretty verbose little instructions there as in the form of comments, and then a page structure. There's no particularly fancy code here. There's a couple things that we haven't really learned quite well yet, including talking about divs, IDs, and classes, which we're about to learn about, and then some of the semantic tags that go with HTML5. And I want you to very carefully listen to that word semantic. And the word semantic refers to the meaning of the word that you're speaking. So when I say semantic tags for HTML, for example, this header tag that you see here, which is different, by the way, than the head tag, is a tag that's supposed to have meaning in HTML structure. So they look at this tag and they say, okay, well, obviously the content inside this header tag must be the header for the page, right? Very much the same way that if we probably went to the bottom, there's probably a footer down here somewhere, perhaps. I'm not seeing one outwardly, but I don't know. Here it is right here. And so that, usually is intended to be at the bottom of the page somewhere. There's also a number of other elements, and you see the heavy use of generic containers called divs, which we then name and give IDs and stuff to. But this is a basic HTML document, folks. There's nothing fancy going on here. There's just a lot of code. And without this, in fact, this is always kind of like a fun little exercise. If you take all this code and copy it, and I take this into my text editor here and paste it in, and then just save this document on the desktop really quick. And I'm just going to call it example. with no CSS. And we'll call it .html, so it becomes a web page. And then I'm just going to drop down to my desktop here and open that up. And this is the web page that we were just looking at, this same web page, right? This is actually what it looks like without CSS. Now, this looks a lot more like what you guys have been doing so far in terms of your basic HTML. It doesn't look exciting. It's just plain black and white text. A couple things are bold, and there's some links and a couple little things, but there's no real like wow aspect to it. And that's where CSS comes in. So the challenge of this website, this guy created this, is he gives out that HTML file and says, hey, this is what I did with my page, right? This is how I styled my page. Why don't you take the same code and put your own style on it and show us what you come up with? And he's done this for a number of years. And I always find it interesting because sometimes I'll come back, you know, after 6 months or a year and take a look, and there'll be some new ones up here. But what he's done is he's put out that challenge, and some people have taken up the challenge. So these links off on the side are, now as you look at this, this is the exact same HTML page. It's the same code underneath. All that's changed are the CSS styles. So same content, different look. Now this is radically different. So when you look at this, you're like, holy cow, how can that be the same code? Give me a break. But if you start to look at the words on the page, you will see that it is exactly the same page. And then as you start to flip through all the different examples, here's another person's take on the same content. This got a little bit different kind of thing going on. Notice how the background stays in place, but everything scrolls. The typography is different. The headers are off to the right. Different colors, fonts. And then as you start to like kind of keep going through this, you'll see some that are pretty interesting. And this one actually isn't behaving quite the way I had hoped. This is usually one of the wow pages, but it's not wowing me right now. This one actually, when it's working right, and I don't know what's going on with it, has all this interactivity. So you move your mouse around the screen, and maybe you guys can do it, and it's working. I'm going to do a refresh on it again. Maybe it just didn't load up right. Or, all right. Well, maybe this one's broken or something. That could be. Going back, let's try one of the other examples. And I always like to show these because it really kind of shows what's possible with the same code, just given different creativity. And I think it's fascinating in many different ways. You know, so first of all, it's like if you're doing all these different approaches and you're using the same code, it should make you scratch your head a little bit and go, well, if they can do that, what can I do? I mean, I'm hoping that's what it does for you. And maybe it does that, maybe it doesn't. But I'm hoping it inspires something in you. But you see, even like the motion there, like that typically would be an animation that we would do with JavaScript, but CSS has that capability too. It also has this like cool little parallax scrolling. And then I don't know if you guys can see that spinning in the background on my screen. It's kind of coming through. But fascinating that you can do all that with the same HTML code and just applying a different style sheet to it. So that in a nutshell is kind of like the capabilities of CSS in terms of taking a page from this to like whatever, you know, is better. So I want to try this one again, see if that's still not working. All right. At least I tried. But if you watch some of my older videos, you can see that one in action. That's kind of cool because you move your mouse around and things like move and scroll and shake and do kind of cool things. But that's the overview. And where we start in this chapter is we start with CSS on a basic level. And so as you guys go into this, I'm more like kind of giving you guidance here than rather than kind of reiterating all the lecture material, is proceed slowly and with caution. And I think that following the pattern that the book offers, either in the PowerPoint or my lectures, is a good way to proceed. So they start by teaching you the different ways to do styles. So they talk about styling in line, which is right with the code. Usually that's to be avoided typically. We would not usually do it that way. The other way to do it is what we call an embedded style sheet. That is where you take your CSS code and you actually put it up here in the head section of your document. So you'd find a spot right here and you put in style tags, and then you start listing all your styles, and it affects everything on the page. What does make a whole lot more sense with CSS, though, is generally to use what we call an external or an imported style sheet, and most coders use externals. Although functionally they are the same thing, but externals seem to be the most popular way. And the advantage of those is you would take a line in your application and you would link to a style sheet, just provide a link and create a separate file. And then when you pull in those separate files, and this is a CSS file here, that one file can control your entire website. So if all your pages link to it, one document here, you could change one line of code and boom, the whole site is changed with one line of code. And that's very, very powerful. There is a bunch of stuff that gets a little bit unusual with this. So it's bad enough that in 1 week you're learning HTML, which is its own markup language. And then in subsequent weeks, here you are learning CSS, and it is a different syntax. They are different words, and there's relationships between the two. But it's the balance between these two languages that really makes the web look the way it does. I know, Lisa, that you've spent a lot of time like doing CSS files, and you can kind of rifle through this pretty quickly and look at all the different styles that the author applied to get exactly the look that we see on the screen, right? And he's got some real basic techniques in here, and then he's got some kind of sophisticated techniques in here as well. But you can see this is several hundred lines of code to make that website look the way it is. Now that seems like a lot, right? Because most of the stuff that we're going to do here in class, you'll be lucky if you get maybe 100 lines, and that'll do most of what you need it to do. The more particular you get with a design, and the more you want that design to be adjusting to a mobile format, for example, the more code you're going to have to run. I have worked on websites. I think my record for the biggest CSS file is like 10,000 lines plus on websites I've worked on. And I will tell you that sometimes when they get that long, I end up splitting the files apart and writing separate CSS files for different things. But you also will come to find patterns in what you do. So for example, I have certain techniques that I always use on like website work that I do. And what I often will do is copy some of those basic CSS techniques from one project to another. So if I have a really cool way of like, I don't know, putting a color on a page or making something a certain size, and I know how that something works, there's no reason why I can't take the code that I've written myself and then copy it to other projects and just use it again, right? So often that happens. Sometimes the code you write is specific to what you're doing and can only be used for one project. But I think very often you're going to be surprised that you can find that some of the things that you come up with as a good practice can be repeated. So those are just, I think, helpful tips. At this point, I'm not going to record any more into the lecture portion here of this video. I just wanted to kind of get people moving forward. I do want to make you understand, though, that this first chapter that covers CSS is basic CSS, and it really focuses more on typography and the text on the page. There is a little bit of talking about how to do colors and how to generate color codes. And you know what? Actually, before I stop the video, let's talk about that just really briefly. Some of you, as you start to learn about how to declare your colors, I think that's can get a little confusing, and I think the lecture materials help a little bit in explaining how color codes work. But if you're trying to find just that right color for a website, I do want to let you know that there are tools out there that you can use. And of course, thank you, Google, for just putting a color picker right on the search results if you type color picker. And this is one frankly, I use quite a bit. And you'll notice, like, if I want to get like a certain shade of a color, so let's say today I'm feeling kind of purple or whatever, right? And maybe because I know the rain's on the way or something. And so I adjust my slider to like the range of colors I want down here, so I get myself in the purple range. And then I try to find just that right shade of purple. So is it really dark or really light or whatever? And let's say this is the one I settle on. What happens down here is this color picker will generate all the codes you need to get the code into your software. So like the base level HTML you usually learn is to do hex codes. And for whatever it's worth, that is a great approach, but I always found it very cryptic, and the way that, this works, folks, is the color codes are broken down in sets of 2, right? So these are hexadecimal numbers. I'm not going to give you a big lecture on what that means, but each pair of numbers is one hexadecimal pair indicating the values for red, green, and blue, and it's in that order. So 5A is actually a hexadecimal way of saying 90. So just so you understand, 42, oops, I really moved that around. I didn't realize I could do that. the middle 2 numbers, 42, even though to us say 42, and base 16, which is hexadecimal, it's actually 66, and 99 in hexadecimal is actually 153. So hexadecimal allows you to have digits from 0 through 9 and then A through F. So you go from 0 to 15. And it's all about base 2 numbering. Watch the complete lecture videos and read your books for a little more explanation. Long story short is all the different formats that you're seeing on the screen here are ways that you can declare colors inside HTML code or CSS. However, I think there are ways that are better than others. Okay, so the screen that we look at is generated with RGB codes. So computer screens run on RGB codes. So in my mind, it makes the most sense to use RGB as the format. Hex is really the same thing, but RGB for me is easier numerically to work with. The numbers go from 0 to 255, so 256 possible values for each placement. First digit is red, second one is green, third one is blue. This one also has the advantage where if you want to add a thing we call opacity to it, you just add a comma and then a value from 0 to 1. So you could go like 0.5, for example, and that would indicate how opaque it is or how see-through something is. So that's one of the reasons I prefer to use that one. CMYK really is dedicated more to the print world, but there are print color equivalents to screen equivalents. So the print world uses its own color system. The screen uses its own. Typically, we would not declare CMYK in an HTML document. The ones that you're starting to see a little bit more here and there, depending on where you look, are these HSL and HSV numbers. And basically, those are just talk about the H and the S stand for hue and saturation. So like the hue basically is kind of like the range of colors. So like on the color wheel here, like what basic color we're shooting for. And then the saturation is how strong the color is and how vibrant or luminous it is. And that's what the V and the L are. Now, while HTML also does these, I'm going to tell you from a practical standpoint, most designers do not use CMYK, HSV, or HSL in the HTML. You're starting to see a little bit more of HSL, but hex and RGB are it. The other thing that I also tell people is that HTML colors have also been defined. So what they've done, and I'm trying to find the chart. So here's the chart where they have all the named colors and all the hex values, all the RGBs, etc. So whatever you want to convert it to. And this is a really simple one. There are even more. So like if you really want to dig into it, and I forget how far they've taken this now. It used to be there was only 8 named colors, and then they moved to 16, and then 32, 64, etc. And now I think they're up to the point where there's hundreds. So if you know that you like, I don't know, like a burnt auburn or something like that, you know, just throwing the color out there, that has a specific definition in color code. And so a lot of times when I'm creating web pages and then just shooting for a basic color, you know, like white or black or red or blue or green or something, I just call them out by name, and that works too. So that, I think that's an important thing to know. And I am seeing more designers use the more verbose names that are out there as well. But you should know where these tools are. My favorite of all these tools, and I think this is, I'm trying to remember what Adobe changed it to. It used to be, the site used to be called Cooler. And now, okay, so now they just call it Adobe Color. So color.adobe.com. And for me, I think this is one of the coolest ones that I've seen. I know I demonstrate this in the lecture videos too. But if you're working on a site and you're trying to find colors and get them to work together, and see that's more the trick, right? So like you might find a cool purple and a cool yellow. It doesn't mean they work together, you know? So how do I find ones that actually do? Well, you need tools like this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of like flip through this, and what they have here, and this, it might be a little hard to see on your screen, is they have these little circles in here, and I'm going to click on one of them and just start to move it. And you see as I move it, how the color intensifies. And then I can move it around the color wheel. And so I can go from a really soft color to a really vibrant color. So I'm just going to kind of back it off a little bit right there. And then based upon the color that I have chosen, it will generate kind of like the Google site, the RGB and the hex values. And I like that Adobe realizes that, you know, those are the primary two that electronic artists use, are RGB and hex. Okay. And then you can come in here, you can make tweaks to this. And this is what's fascinating. This is what they call an analogous color theme, meaning that it's generally colors very similar to this that are just a few shades off. But you notice that they do all work together, right? They mathematically, this is all done mathematically, folks. There's a harmony to these colors in the math that represents them. And that's how these are generated. Now what's fascinating about this other these other options here is then you can start to switch up. So you can say, well, those are analogous colors. What about all the colors that are in the same color range? So these are all in the same slice of color. It's just the intensity of the color that's different here. And so this creates a monochromatic scheme. This is the primary color I chose, but different shades of the same color in light and darkness. Also go to a triad. So now notice what happens mathematically. We're splitting all of these colors to these, I don't know, we're splitting the wheel in the third, basically, right? And this is what they call the triad. So these are also mathematically generated and hypothetically work together in some way. I guess I'm not seeing it so much, but here's one that's complementary, and complementary colors are ones that are on the opposite side of the color wheel. And so very often you'll find like a strong blues are usually complementary to yellows, and you know, purples are kind of complementary to green, right? And so, and what you're seeing here is with all the 5 different wheels that are on the chart, you're creating colors that kind of work together in a color scheme. And you got all like, yeah, I really like that. It'd be really cool for my site. And you have all the colors all laid out. And you can take it further. You can actually save these color schemes and come back to them. Of course, you can always just grab it. But another thing that's kind of interesting, like you can try all the different settings that they have here, you know, different shades. and whatever. But they also give you this ability where you can take an image that you already have. So let's say that you have an image of somebody, you know, in a business or, you know, I don't know, think of some sort of like endeavor, right? That somebody might have a picture of, right? Like, and you take a picture of that and you want to match the colors in that image. So you can actually import an image into this tool and it will extract the key colors that you point out in the image. Like, I want to get that special gray color in that guy's hair or whatever. Or, you know, I want to get the, you know, the red of his t-shirt, you know, and you can actually pinpoint on that image what colors you want to work and then build a whole color scheme around it from an image that you have, as opposed to just guessing at what the color is. So I think it's a fantastic tool and highly recommended to play with. You know, playing with colors and real simple typography can be a lot of fun, folks. But whenever you get to the point where you're like starting to design stuff, I do have some like tips that I like to give people. And this is where I'm going to end, I guess, this lecture today. Is generally speaking, what looks good on the screen is simplicity overall. I think, you know, sometimes what I see as a mistake that a lot of young designers do is they try to put too much on the screen and too close together. Or they will create a box to contain content and the words are touching the edge of the box. And it's like, well, that doesn't look good. And they might just be happy that they got the words in the box. So they just kind of leave it where it is. But you have to start looking a little bit at aesthetics, and usually simple aesthetics are the most effective. You know? So why do Google websites look great? Because they don't put a lot on them. They keep the typography simple. The backgrounds are, you know, plain solid colors and contrasting text, and that concept of contrast is really important too. So why white background and black text? Because it's easy to read, right? Have you ever gone to a website where the background is black and the text is gray, and you're like struggling to read it? Well, that isn't, you know, a good thing. All right, so just take some of those tips, go through the lecture videos. We have identified that the sound is bad on some of these, and I apologize for that. It had to do with when I recorded them in the air handling system. So if you're having a hard time hearing that, what I would suggest is go to the archive video and watch the lecture. It covers all the same materials. And just because it's a little bit older doesn't mean it's any less valid or different. So, you know, if you're struggling with that audio, and I apologize for that. So I did put a note in there. Next time around, I'm going to record it fresh all over again. I'm going to end the video here, and then we'll kind of proceed from there. So give me a sec here. This video ends here.